Hey guys, it's Jake from Polykill. And guess what this is? It's that God of War video that I've been talking about for months. Um, Life has been kind of crazy. I haven't really had a lot of time to do this. Or rather haven't been in the mindset and had the right time at the right time. But finally, here it is. So you've heard me talk about the game on the podcast probably. I praised it greatly. I kind of played it at the end of some rough months at the start of the year. Things were kind of upside down. I wanted to get lost in a game. I decided to pick it up, and then Travis, out of the goodness of his heart, bought it for me anyway. So I still didn't break my promise to not buy a game for 6 months. Um, However, you probably already know all of that. So let me just talk about the game specifically. Now, I will say that there will be spoilers at the end of this video or near the second half. I will warn you when I start talking about spoilery stuff. So if you haven't beaten the game, maybe stray away from this video until you have. If you don't care about spoilers, feel free to stay and watch, or watch up until I say, hey, stop, there's spoilers. So, good to go? All right, cool. So the first thing I want to talk about for the game is the visuals. It's hard to really describe how good this game looks. Now, I played this game on a launch PS4. I bought this on launch day, whatever day it was in 2013, I guess, at this point. I do have HDR on my TV. I do have a 4K TV, but I did play at 1080p. With HDR, it's like you really shouldn't play it any other way if you can help it. That HDR really brings a lot to life. I mean, the increased resolution on a PS4 Pro would be probably even more amazing, but I still really can't imagine how. Every bit of the game is detailed. I mean, down to the last stitch. The armor, the weapons, the character models, the facial animations, the landscapes, the water. I mean, there's not anything that stands out in this game as being below a magnificent standard. Like if you look at something like Horizon Zero Dawn, a big critique that a lot of people have of the graphics in that game is the water textures. They're not great. They're very flat looking, not very reflective. Maybe that's something that Guerrilla just hadn't messed with before. Either way, God of War just nails pretty much everything. I don't have a single complaint with the visuals. There are just jaw dropping. The very emotive characters are in this game from start to finish. Like whether it's Kratos, whether it's Atreus, whether it's some of the side characters, which I'll talk about a little bit later once we get into kind of spoiler territory. But the other thing that kind of comes to mind is, and it kind of dovetails with the next point, is just the scale of everything. Now, if you played God of War back in the day on PS2 and maybe the PS3 version, I don't think it came across quite as well in the PSP versions, but there was always this massive scale with God of War. It was always, the camera would zoom back and Kratos would become this tiny figure on the screen and you'd be fighting this massive creature, and that kind of gave you a sense of how big things could get in the world of gods and mythology. But I don't know, when you think about like scaling that back, all it does is shrink who you are and make the other thing that you're fighting or facing or is speaking or whatever kind of just as big as you have been. So like there's not this transition of size. You don't get to see that other than yourself shrink and something else become as big as you were. And that worked probably fine, and probably technologically speaking, that's all that could be done at the time. In this game, though, we do have that camera work that happens throughout the game. And, some people have said it's not 100% no cut. And yeah, there's definitely little cheats here and there. And there are definitely times when the camera definitely does cut, like if you die in combat or if you pause the game or something like that. I do recall seeing some early prototype screens and footage where they really wanted to make the menus of the game like on the Leviathan axe. So like even when you pause the game to like do upgrades or something like that, all that would be embedded on the axe itself, like in the work, the mill work on the blades. So that apparently didn't work out, but that would have been cool too. But anyway, with this camera, you also get a sense of scale because it's a steady cam shot that sort of follows whoever the lead person is at the moment. Most of the time, that's Kratos. It does shift from time to time depending on the perspective or the storytelling as it goes. But the cool thing is, when you get that camera behind you and then you see these massive creatures or these big bosses, or whether it's something in the landscape, the camera that's hovering behind Kratos will shift maybe down into the left or down to the right, and you kind of get a much bigger sense of, well, a much better sense of how much bigger everything really is than you. You realize how small you are in comparison. And I think that really sets it apart in terms of gameplay design. And it's another one of those ways that that camera really works to make sure that you never really lose connection with the character and kind of feel that scale that comes across. I think it's awesome. Another thing that it does is you never really lose connection, with the character. Like I love things like Uncharted or Tomb Raider or whatever, but every time they cut to like those black bars and you get a cinematic, the tension is kind of released because you know that you're not really in control of anything and you're in that movie watching mode. So you're engaged with the story, but you kind of lose that connection for a second, especially if they're doing wide shots or AB shots. You're just an observer at that point. But with this steady cam that never leaves the side of your character, it's pretty impressive. There's no fades. It's just you there with Kratos, and it really brings the emotional parts home because it's like you're right there with him through everything. It's really kind of a one of a kind thing on that scale, anyway. I know a few other games like Senua's Sacrifice has dabbled in that. The other thing that I'll say it does, the camera, and then I'll move on, is that it really differentiates itself between trying to emulate a movie and trying to be a great video game. Because if you look at the cinematography of most of the video games that we've played for the last 20 years, especially with 3D graphics, and once they started, the only thing that they could really emulate were movies. So that's what they did. They chose typical crane shots or set pieces that sort of translated out of the movies, and that works because it's something relatable, something we understand, something we get. It's a reference point. But what God of War does is it takes this camera and it makes the visual aspect, your window into the world, 100% a video game. I mean, there's been like short movies that have been single Steadicam shots, but you're never going to spend 30 or 40 hours in one place with somebody in another medium other than a game like this. So I think that really sets it apart. The next thing I'll talk about is the action in the game. I mean, God of War is an action game after all. The combat evolved with this game along with everything else, whether it was the character and the motivation and the visuals, the combat also evolved. There's my first worry when I started playing the game and I heard that Atreus was going to be part of your arsenal in a way. I was worried that he was going to get in the way, or worried that it wouldn't be terribly useful, or I knew it wouldn't be an escort mission. I knew that Santa Monica wouldn't do that to us, thank God. But what I did find interesting was that he was 100% useful throughout the game. I mean, it bodes well to level up his skills and get that bow just churning in combat. It's extremely helpful, and it's 100% part of the game, and it also ties into the story and the connection between the characters in amazing ways. Um, so moving on to Kratos, the Leviathan Axe is 100% the best video game weapon that I have played with in ages. Um, I think it's going to go down in history as one of the most iconic, much like um, the chainsaw bayonets from Gears of War. I think this thing will last because it feels great. There's 100% weight to it, and there's some cool videos on how Santa Monica did that. You should check it out if you haven't already. But no matter how many times you throw that axe and hit that button to recall it, and you just see Kratos reach up and grab it, and you hear the thud and you feel the rumble, it just never gets old. It's awesome every single time that you do it. And I did it hundreds of times in my playthrough, and probably will play it again once that Game Plus is live. So, yeah, really awesome stuff. It also acts as a puzzle solving tool, which is pretty cool. The puzzles in the game are pretty light. They're pretty quick to figure out, especially if you kind of get an idea of how their design, mentality was. But it's still pretty cool that it's an integral part of who Kratos is. It all sort of centers around that axe. And it interacts with the world in just a ton of unique ways that whether it's like you throw it over grass and the grass sort of ripples when it goes by, or whether you throw it into the water and the water splashes when it comes back out. I mean, it's really cool. Um, the next thing I'll talk about is the world of the game. It's pretty damn cool. I was really jazzed when I learned that the game would be set in sort of pre-humanity Scandinavia, back when the gods roamed the earth, and even though it's a long time after the events of like the initial God of War series, it's still way before humans populate the world. So there's, and hopefully that's not a spoiler. I don't think it is. Sorry, but there are nice little, I won't call them biomes, but there are different segments of the world that are just absolutely gorgeous. I mean, and they convey the story elements well with their color palettes, and they're all gorgeously rendered and just absolutely beautiful to be in. What I do like about it is it's not 100% open world. There are like areas that you can roam around in, but it's not a game that you can just kind of get lost in. Like I, for one, don't always love an open world game. I can get lost. I can get frustrated with not knowing where to go. But the idea of this sort of walling you in and guiding you um, is pretty useful for someone like me who likes to play through a game. And even though it doesn't necessarily take you by the hand and pull you through, it does sort of add some constraints that allow you to only go certain ways, so you're not just running in circles looking for, the next dot on your map. You always should know where to go, and that's pretty useful. Even if you don't want to go there, you should know where you're wanting to go. Uh, so the next thing I'll talk about, and this is where it's going to get a little spoilery. So if you haven't played the game or don't want to know spoilers, stop now. You've been warned. Okay, we're talking about the supporting cast. So there are some amazing characters. I won't go into too much detail because still don't want to do that if you haven't played the game. But there are a ton of amazing side characters in the game. Let's say a ton. I mean like 7 or 8. And then there's a couple specifically that are just absolutely awesome, and that is Brock and Sindri, the two um, dwarfs that kind of take care of your axe and their constant bickering, and absolutely two of my favorite side characters, specifically Brock, in Ages. They're very well fleshed out. You understand their motivations. They're funny. They're fun. You're always glad to see them. Like a smile always crept on my face when I was playing through the game and saw them show up, because they will just do that. They'll just show up at random points in the game. You'll just walk into them in a way. And it was always refreshing to see them, and always just, you knew you were going to have some fun moments. Um, there's also a few others that I won't talk about that really, really pretty damn cool. Some nice reveals, some cool twists. Twists, I'm using that term very lightly, but the characters aren't just one note or two-dimensional characters. They have a lot of depth and motivations, and they have just a myriad of emotions that they go through, and you kind of get to be there with them when they do that, and that's pretty rad. So the last thing I'll touch on is the plot. Now this is where it gets the most spoiler heavy, but this is sort of the arc of the game, because if you play the original God of War games, you kind of understand why Kratos is mad, why he wants to kill the gods. He's just just a man slash god that is out for vengeance 100%. And then in this game, you meet a character who is also 100% out for vengeance, angry, just aggressive, and you kind of get to see what that looks like, or Kratos gets to see what that looks like from the outside. And you really get to go through that growth with him of understanding why that doesn't work and why that's bad and why that has to stop. And it's a beautiful written story. Like it really couldn't be any better from start to finish, whether it's the motivation for the game. Like when you start the game, um, the game hinges on doing one thing, and it's one very small thing, and is literally going from one place to another. But everything unfolds from that, and just spokes off of that, and it becomes this big, you know, godly and ungodly mess of just tangled branches and storylines. It's really amazing. It's everyone should play it. It's the game of the generation for sure, and easily one of my favorite games of all time. And I really can't think of one better. It may be my favorite game of all time. So if you haven't played it, make a point to do it. It's worth whatever they're asking for it. I paid 60, rather Travis paid 60. So if you've got that laying around, if you got some trading credit, if you want to wait till it's on sale or used, I get it. But please play the game. It's definitely worth your time. Very rewarding, um, and should be played by everyone. Peace.